On the 9th of April 1980, Mr. J. Saxton, Managing Director of the Essex Chronicle series, sent a message to all staff congratulating them on their efforts in producing a new evening paper to be called the Evening Herald. With the launch date fast approaching, all they had to do now was to convince Chelmsfordians to part with 10p every evening. The note continued to point out that it was absolutely vital that all communications upwards, downwards and sideways are conducted through the established structure, and that the pivot points for critical interdepartmental actions and decisions are fully known and understood. Shortcuts and unilateral action will lead to absolute chaos, which will be frowned upon. And of course, having printed your newspaper, you have to deliver it. And here we see a photograph of a group of Baddo youngsters who are all geared up to deliver the Evening Herald direct to your home. As part of the Herald circulation department, these junior agents were collecting their papers from Mrs. Maureen Sims of Harrow Way in a trial run. The first edition of the Chelmsford Evening Herald appeared on Monday, April the 14th, 1980, with stories about a water main burst, something ridiculous that was going on in the council, what was wrong with the city, but not even a flamed-up Marconi lead was going to get Chelmsfordians rushing down to the newsagents, so they tried a winner-free radio. Well, it was a Marconi story, after all. And on that opening evening, on Monday, April 14th, 1980, there was an editorial. Good evening. You are reading the very first edition of Chelmsford's very first evening newspaper, the paper that everyone's talking about. Inside, you'll find everything you've ever wanted in a newspaper. News, pictures, sport, and all your favourite features, plus all the national and international news that together with our local evening coverage makes the Evening Herald the paper you just can't afford to be without. Watch out for tonight's free competition guide to tonight's television and radio programmes on page 18 and 19. There's a page for the ladies, and later this week we introduce a special feature for our youngest members of the family. Yes, there's something for everyone in the Evening Herald. It's the paper everyone's talking about. Or were they? Yes, things are happening at last at the Essex Chronicle. Chelmsford's favourite newspaper group begins publication of its Evening Herald today. And as the champagne corks popped and the press began pounding out the news 5 days a week, the Herald brought daily digest of all that's news in Chelmsford. And it was on sale 5 days a week. And of course, having got the thing rolling off the presses at long last, there was time for a brief celebration by the staff involved. The first edition featured this photograph that looks very much like a gathering of old faces from the Essex Chronicle and the Brentwood Gazette. The editor, Mr. Derek Hales, is seated here with his news team. Derek Hales began and ended his journalistic career with the Essex Chronicle series. He quickly rose from cub reporter to the editor of the Brentwood Gazette, but was tempted by the poison chalice that saw him exit Westway HQ via the newsroom's back doors. Derek did his very best to make the Herald a success, but the recession, lack of resources and humdrum village news did for him. In a last-gasp bid, Herald executives tried to expand into Harlow, desperately basing reporters on a bench close to a red telephone box in the town. Devastated, Derek emigrated to Canada and married the daughter of an ice hockey retailer. And to open the paper, they were actually giving away money. To launch the new paper, they were giving away a £5. In this special edition of the Herald, you will find a car sticker which would win you a £5. All you had to do was put the sticker in the window of your car, and if it was spotted by one of the staff, you could get yourself a £5 note. We don't actually have a picture of Evening Herald editor Derek Hales reading an Evening Herald. The picture accompanying this particular article is a snap probably taken when he was first appointed as editor of the Brentwood Gazette. So the paper was launched and was said to be a rip-roaring success. Oh, Chelmsford Great and Good may have given the Evening Herald a rip-roaring send-off, but did they continue to buy it? Privately, they must all have been raising their collective eyebrows because Britain was in deep recession and nothing very newsworthy happened in Chelmsford, and if it did, they would much rather prefer to read about it in the dear old Essex Chronicle. There's only one thing to do with a newspaper that praises itself: fake news, and to wrap up the cod and chips. Of course, nobody could have guessed the Great Recession would strike as the newspaper was launched in the spring of 1980. But Mr. Saxton and his yes-men could still have done with a reality check about the dullest town in England, according to Charles Dickens anyway. It didn't take long to realise that if you went to Chelmsford, you'd taken a step back in time. It was a sleepy county town when it came to the kind of stories worthy of a daily paper. The Essex Chronicle newsroom was likened to a rest home for recovering and resting journalists, dubbing it Hack-a-While, and even if a mass murder occurred, it would only have made a couple of paragraphs on page 35. And this, of course, in a town where it took 25 years to decide to build a flyover in the wrong direction, and so far only 60 years to not build a railway station at Boreham. Ex-Romford Observer editor David Scott was a shadowy figure at Westway during the Herald's rise and fall. He included a chapter of his time at the evening in Once a Week is Enough. David wrote the total redundancy package for 70 jobs and committed the company to paying out £800,000. The unions couldn't believe their luck. Head office in London ordered an investigation. Every year the Essex show would roll around and there was a bumper entry for the two competitions that were run by the Essex Chronicle series at the Essex show where they had a stand. They even managed to win first prize in their section and attracted a large crowd on both days, with Phil Dowsett's Formula 3 racing car a big attraction. All four Herald editors, David Ward, Peter Sanders, Roger Furlow and Terry Cook, were already on the staff of the Essex Chronicle series. All but Terry remained at Westway after its demise. You can imagine the Essex Chronicle editor, Peter Smith, in the style of Dad's Army Captain Mannering, addressing them thus: "Well, men, you've fought the good fight. It's back to our dear old barracks, so keep calm and carry on." The deputy editor of the Evening Herald was David Ward. He'd been deputy editor of the Essex Chronicle for 4 years. He'd also served as news editor and chief reporter for the Chronicle during his 12 years with the series. David was a member of the Guild of Motoring Writers and wrote about all sorts of motoring topics for the Herald whilst retaining his weekly column in the Chronicle series. He also had the added responsibility of looking after the Herald's industrial coverage. When the Evening Herald opened, it was said of Peter Sanders that he will lead features team on the Evening Herald. Peter from Brentwood has been editor of the Newsman Herald for several years. He's a former editor of the Brentwood Gazette and features editor of the Chelmsford Chronicle. He said features will be the salt and pepper of the hard news diet of the Evening Herald, with articles of special interest to women readers every day. Roger Furlow, Evening Herald production manager, joined the Essex Chronicle series 6 years previously after working throughout Suffolk and Essex with the East Anglian Daily Times. He'd previously been responsible for group editorial training, a position he held for 18 months after helping to launch the Braintree and Malden editions of the Essex Chronicle. Terry Cook was a news editor and began his journalistic career at an East London news agency before joining the Dagenham Post. He had then spent 2 years on the Romford Times before joining the Brentwood Gazette. He was soon appointed chief reporter and promoted to news editor, and later became assistant editor of the Billericay Gazette. Mr. Cook had been with the company for 10 years when he took over the news team on the Evening Herald. The chief photographer of this merry band was one Jeff Baker, who joined the firm in 1956 when the offices were in the High Street. He'd seen most of the big events in the town over the last 24 years and had photographed most of the royal family. He was eager to forge a team of cameramen of high energy and interesting foresight to bring news in an interesting and absorbing manner. His great love was the sea, and he used to roam the coastline in his yacht. Peter Russell was the oldest member of the photographic team and had been around the area for a long time and was well known by most of the local organisations. Formerly chief photographer with the Essex Weekly News, he joined the Chronicle staff 11 years previously. Tony Tween had been with the photographic staff since 1962, having trained in the town's E. Nixon Payne studios. An active Christian, Tony had a good knowledge of the local church scene. Spare time was taken up with work in the Elim Church, where he was a Sunday school superintendent, youth leader and choir member. Clive Tarling was 30 and had worked as a freelance photographer for the Essex Chronicle for over 10 years. He joined the staff team in 1979. Clive had trained in the 1960s with Fox Photos, one of London's top press agencies. In the 1970s, he worked as a commercial and press photographer throughout Europe. John McLellan began his photographic career in Nucleus Studios Limited in London. He'd progressed to be a photographer's assistant to Finmore and Field Photo Limited in Chancery Lane, and for the past 6 years he had been deputy chief photographer to the Brentwood Gazette. John had a wife and 2 children and lived in Gallywood. And of course there were the sports pages. The sports squad was led by sports editor Bernard Webber. And he was going to bring daily reports, views and comment from the national and local scene. Bernard Webber was formerly sports editor to the Essex Chronicle and was going to draw upon his vast experience to provide the very best coverage. He was very well known for his on-the-spot Essex cricket reports. David Hamilton, assistant sports editor, was also the production pages chief. In addition, his former assistant editor of Golf Illustrated was going to keep in touch with the world of golf nationally and locally. Chris Stratford, former Romford Observer sports editor and also latterly with Golf Illustrated, will also be covering the general sporting scene and talking to the top personalities in all sports areas. Doug Bell, well, he was new to the Essex Chronicle sports editor and he was going to keep an eye on the Chelmsford scene and also write on amateur boxing. And finally, there was cricket's biggest name at the time, Essex skipper Keith Fletcher. He was going to be the number one guest columnist and was going to be writing every Wednesday. And what of those lads that were delivering the paper? Well, the Evening Herald delivery boys, Jeff and John Dunn, netted themselves a free holiday when they took part in a table tennis contest whilst on holiday. Brothers Jeff, 15, and John, 14, of Springfield, beat British international Chester Barnes. They entered the contest while staying at a Warner's holiday camp on the Isle of Wight, and their first prize included a free holiday at the camp for the whole family. Well, of course, the 10p masthead price brings along an income. The other way of making money on a newspaper, of course, is to sell advertising, and here we have the advertising service with a smile. And here is the Evening Herald advertising team. Left to right, Mel Jarvis, Alan Mitchell, Judy Vince, Michael Coates, Jill Archibald and David Blight. In the front row we have Lynn Alexander and Carol Dawn and Peter Smith. A legend in the annals of the Essex Chronicle, Ralph Tyrrell first masterminded the transfer to Westway of the previous High Street HQ back in the mid-60s. Fast forward to April 1980 when he was in charge of the production and distribution of the new evening newspaper. Chronicle journalists always manage to spell Ralph's surname incorrectly. It has two R's, so when they all joined the Evening Herald, guess what? And here we have a picture of Ralph with the Inkies about to press the button of the mighty Goss press to signify a well-earned retirement. Well, he might have been production manager, but at any other time, what with the unions at the time, he wouldn't have been allowed anywhere near the go button. Anglia Television had an outstation in London Road in Chelmsford, and Jill Cowley reported on Anglia's new operation. In those days, of course, it was a four-person TV crew, camera, sound and lighting. Nowadays, all replaced by an iPhone. Every workplace has its characters, and of course here we see hairy Evening Herald hack and now seafaring union journo Andrew Lillington, a former close colleague of Lech and Basil, in the Westway newsroom. Slow news say? Well, make it yourself, and here we have the Herald staff winning a pancake race. They set a record course time of 7.75 seconds. The slowest team took 13 seconds, and pictured left to right are Steve Clow, Deb Stone, John McGlennan and Andrew Lillington. And for winning that pancake race, it was reported by the Essex Chronicle had reported that a team from the Evening Herald had walked off with the Jeff Lemon Trophy and a £15 prize for completing the course in the fastest time. And then there was an exclusive by Steve Cloud. Six-man on Newlyweds, my word. That's one of the Herald scoops involving sex and the church. There's the thing. Thanks to a good contact who tipped Steve off. Steve concluded that the industrial action by civil servants would mean that the Catholic Church would not want newlyweds to consummate. So he rang the Catholic hierarchy and they confirmed the hunch. The exclusive was soon picked up by the Nationals. Steve says that a journalist who does not thrive on scoops and exclusives should go and work in a convenience store. He cannot recall what the major news story John Saxton is referring to, but he had to hold the front page of the Essex Chronicle so they were not humiliated by that evening's Herald. Steve raced up to Great Dunmow after a tip-off that comedian Mike Reed and his family had left their 6-acre home near Chelmsford and fled to Great Dunmow. When he drove up the track, he saw Mike atop a lawnmower, but he'd hit a boulder when we distracted him. He stormed over, ready for fisticuffs, but calmed down when Steve told him that he was not from Fleet Street. Then 3 young Evening Herald apprentices swapped their scalpels, you can only wonder, for seasickness pills to go on a Thames trip with a difference. The teenagers from your evening's paper's composing room soon discovered the ups and downs of river life during a day's visit to large firms plying London's river. Mark Blowers, 18, from Goldley Avenue, Shane Champion, 18, from Lynmouth Avenue, and 16-year-old Carl Copsey from Sawney-Brook Writtle saw other apprentices working on the river and discussed their problems. The lads were given a chance to steer one of the craft down the Thames. They went out in a workboat to meet a German seagoing tug which had arrived to return barrier-building pontoons to Holland, and then travelled on a steel-carrying ship and steered the vessel towards her berth at Greenwich. Accompanying them on their trip was training officer Mr. Doug Nice, who commented, "Well, you could feel the power of the engines and the steering as you turned the wheel." "What's going on?" "Well, apparently not a lot," was the answer in the newsroom. By October 1980, full-page Herald adverts started to appear in the Essex Chronicle. So what to do? Well, cash prizes encouraged loyal Essex Chronicle readers to try the scary Evening Herald. Contract killer convicted. Quick toll tops 400. Ripper sets death rate. Yet all they valued was the reassuring village news. Lack of advertising in the Essex Chronicle and lack of sales in the Evening Herald forced a desperate management to publish bizarre full-page adverts during the run-up to Christmas. It was not long before the Evening Herald resorted to flamed-up non-stories. MP Norman St. John Stevens knew exactly how to make a mountain out of his molehill visit to the Vatican. Tanzanians in Essex Hospital, hijack hostage, sparks malaria scare. Now, this is the kind of story that sells newspapers. The reporters of Keith Mangay, Steve Clow, Gary Green and Andrew Lindington. Pictures were by Jeff Baker, Ken Bollard, John McClelland, Clive Tarling and Tony Tween. Steve recalls that every hack and snapper who rushed to Stansted Airport in March 1982 was lured by Essex police into a musty old World War II Nissen hut that was nowhere near the action and got kettled. They were given blankets, pillows and Stanley Stansted teddy bears and warned to stay put. With a couple of landlines to go round, the Free Press had to rely upon statements vetted by the cops. The pics of the Armed Force Support Unit and the African leaving St John's Hospital following the health check was the best the paper could get onto the front page, while the exclusive, for pages 2 and 3, were a press version of clickbait. And then the inevitable letter arrived from MD John Saxton, who admitted that the national economic recession was hitting advertising revenue just 18 months after a Champagne launch. Chelmsford and Brentwood do not seem to yield as much as we expected for a lively evening newspaper. But our established weeklies thrive on ordinary grassroots news. So standing on the composing room steps, Managing Director Saxton told a shocked but not surprised workforce that the Herald would cease, shedding over 130 jobs, in a bid to save the remaining 200 staff. But the unions pledged to fight on. So there was a bonfire of the vanities. Distress rocket over Westway on bonfire night, but somehow it was able to splutter on until the spring of 1982. And so the writing was on the wall. Delaying the inevitable, the management deployed a well-tried tactic of asking the unions to propose cost-saving solutions to save the Evening Herald. As somebody pointed out, there was only one way to solve the accumulated losses threatening the paper's existence. Well, it was all very depressing, and Janet Stevenson managed to find 20 symptoms of depression, which included copious crying fits. Oh, that was to come. So an article appeared in the newspaper saying that the future of the newspaper had been secured after meetings between the management and national officers of the printing and journalist unions. But just a few days after the Evening Herald published its article came the official announcement that it was closing. Yes, its future really had been secured. It was closing. And that, having secured what it wanted with the unions by reducing the number of jobs by over 60, the publishers, the Essex Chronicle series, revealed that it would close anyway. And so the brown envelopes arrived on the 20th of January 1982 when John Saxton announced 72 redundancies. The leavers were generously compensated. Saxton doubled the standard 1-year payoff to 2 years. It was not a misunderstanding, but honest John's generosity. So the official redundancy notice was set out on Friday, November the 13th. The news was broken to a shocked staff at the Essex Chronicle series by the managing director, John Saxton. The evening paper, launched by the group, which was owned by Associated Newspapers, was first published only 18 months previously, and staff were told that a package of major cutbacks would lead to the loss of more than 130 jobs from the total workforce of 330. And so the Evening Herald did end in something of a blaze of glory when firemen snatched 3 pensioners from a blazing Chelmsford public house and gave the newspaper sellers on the street something to actually shout about. It's true that most times you couldn't tell the difference between the front page and reports of WI meetings in sleepy Chelmsford and its leafy surrounds. And so the editor, Derek Hales, wrote a thank you and goodbye, 3 paragraphs, an epitaph to mark the paper's short life when it went to press for the final time on April the 16th, 1982. And so, in that final edition, one of the lads in the composing room paid their own respects on the personal announcements page in the newspaper, where they composed a fitting farewell in memoriam to the final edition, where it read, Herald, evening newspaper, killed on April the 16th. Condolences expressed to those loyal staff who fought long and hard to keep it alive. And so the front pages of the first and last Chelmsford Evening Herald. The first one, born on Monday, the 14th of April, 1980, with a story about a Marconi affair in Saudi Arabia. And, of course, the last one, with the pub blaze drama with women rescued, and the paper died on Friday, April the 16th, 1982. So here's a final photograph of the staff. Not everyone wanted to pose for the final picture. It was probably snapped by picture editor Jeff Baker after the final Evening Herald went to bed on April the 16th, 1982. Just about everyone managed to grab 2 years redundancy and scarper off sharpish, especially the mother of the National Union of General Chapel. Especially blessed was a new recruit who pocketed the payola before even working a shift. And if you were part of that merry mob and you've forgotten who all the rest of them were, well, here's a reminder. So what happened to it all? Well, down in the vaults of London's British Library, safe from nuclear warfare, moth, plague and COVID, are the leather-bound volumes of the 3-year-old evening paper. These 2 contain the first and last editions of the daily that had absolutely no hope of making old bones. And so there we have the story of the Evening Herald, which, like a skyrocket, rose to the heavens, fled briefly, and then faded into obscurity. The printing press was invented by Caxton. The Herald was closed by Saxton.